G'day everybody, and thanks for tuning into this series on motorcycle personal protective equipment. Today we're going to be talking about motorcycle helmet safety. With me is, as always, is Ellen from MotoGirl in the UK. And our guest today is Joe from MotoDirect, also in the UK. Joe, I might pass to you to give us a bit of a background on your expertise regarding motorcycle helmets.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much for having me this morning. So, as you said, my name's Joe. I work for a company in the UK called MotoDirect. We're the UK importer of 3 helmet brands, so Arai, AGV, and Bell. And when I first started working at the company, I was working with the race guys as well. So it's a really good kind of thrown at the deep end job, because I was having to work very closely with very particular customers who wanted to know all the technicalities and all the safety elements that helmets come with. It's a big part of racing at the end of the day. So I've been really lucky in my exposure to the information that's out there. So much so that my job then changed and I became the product lead, as it were, the technical person. And all of our customers come to me for any advice. So hence why I'm with you here today.
Yep.
Fantastic. And I think from today, what we want to sort of get from you and use that expertise is to helping people that are riders when they go into a shop and when they're selecting a helmet, of really what they want to look out for and actually what goes into creating these helmets. I mean, they walk into a shop and, like you can see behind you, they're instantly met with just a wall of these incredible styles and colors, and it can be very easy to go, oh, that's the prettiest one, let's just go for that one. But when people walk into a store, what are the main things they want to be looking out for when they're first selecting a helmet for themselves?
Absolutely. I mean, that's like the $1 million question, isn't it? Especially for a new rider, because it is such a minefield. Professionals in the industry like myself, we always have kind of one really generic piece of advice that I think is the first and foremost and most important. And it does make kind of finding the right helmet a bit of a laborious task, but it's something that it's really worth taking the time over. And that's first and foremost is the fitment. Okay. If a helmet fits you correctly, it will absolutely protect you better. That's what it all comes down to, even down to a comfort level. Okay. So yes, we know what a helmet's going to do in the event of an accident because of the tests that we perform on that helmet, but it also has to be comfortable. Because if you're thinking about your helmet, if you're uncomfortable in your helmet, if it's not ventilating correctly or doesn't give you the correct view, for example, then it's going to cause your attention to be pulled away from what you're doing on the motorcycle. So first and foremost, what to look for in a helmet: look for one that fits you correctly. Now, that's a really easy thing to say, but maybe a difficult thing to get right. And how a helmet should fit is definitely something that I think we'll come back to talk about more. But also, I'd say that one of the most important things is ensure that you're getting a helmet that has the features that you look for as a customer. So, for example, if you want one that's a flip front because you want to do lots of touring, you want to go into a fuel station, flip it up so you can fuel your bike, something like that, that's brilliant. Look for that feature. Not every brand delivers that. But also question yourself why you want these features. One thing that we don't talk or customers don't necessarily have at the forefront is that safety element. And then the other thing I'd say would be pick a good quality helmet, because when we test the helmet, it's only ever tested when it's brand new. And how do we know that the helmet's going to perform over the lifespan of the helmet to give you a really safe piece for that extended period of time if you're not buying a good quality one? Everyone's going to have the budget. Don't get me wrong. I totally understand that. Buy the best one that you can afford, that fits you and has your features that you want. And then obviously after that, get one that looks good as well, because biking is all about looking good, right?
Yeah, I've got to match the bike. No, that's really interesting. And actually, you touched a little bit on the testing there. And when you go in, you've found that style of helmet that you like, and it's got the vision that I want, the style that's perfect for my riding. How do you know in the store or when you're ordering online that helmet is tested? What are sort of the procedures that get that helmet on the shelf fully tested?
So it depends what country you come from, effectively. there are a few different areas of the world that test helmets in a few different ways. For our means and purposes, we adhere to ECE regulation. So that's the Economic Community of Europe, and our current regulation is 2205, and we're moving over to a new regulation which has been built and more helmets are being delivered, which is called 2206. That's the sixth revision of that homologation for the helmet. To be honest, most helmets from a good quality brand will actually have the 2205 or 2206 marks somewhere on the outside of the helmet to say, hey guys, this helmet is 2205 or 2206 approved, no problems at all. But if it doesn't, what we can do is we can look on the inside of the helmet to look for an E mark. The E mark is the passport of the helmet. It says, hey, this has been homologated to this standard, whether it's 05, 06, and it also gives you a batch code and a date that the helmet was produced under so that you can trace that back with the manufacturer if you need to. This is often found on the inside of the helmet, either on the chin strap, hidden away by the chin strap cover, or underneath the skull cap, depending on which manufacturer you're going to. But effectively, if we're buying one of those two helmet homologations, we know that they're safe and, more importantly, legal as well for the UK market or for other countries, depending on which one you're in. I know that ECE is the most widely adopted homologation as well. So for example, I believe Australia uses ECE, South Africa uses ECE, even though they're not part necessarily of that Economic Community of Europe. So I'd say you need to look for those different test standards. There are then other test standards that a helmet could be homologated to as either an additional or as a separate. So for example, we've seen in the past few years, there's been a new helmet approval from the FIM. The FIM is the regulating body for MotoGP, World Superbikes, Endurance World Championship. And they decided to make their own test standard to ensure that their riders were as safe as possible. And you can go into a shop and buy that helmet. If you wanted to buy that helmet, it gives you the advantages of being able to race or track day ride, knowing that you've got that same standard of helmet that's given to those race riders that are traveling very fast. Often those helmets will also be ECE approved, which means they're legal for the road as well. So there's lots of kind of minimum test standards, but as we move over and transfer over to 2206, what I would say is there is more choice that is safer than ever. Realistically, it's never been safer to be a motorcyclist. And if safety is at the forefront of your mind, I would highly recommend going for a 2206 or an FIM approved helmet, because they both are representing the highest echelon of safety. 2206 and FIM, just so you know as well, are exactly the same in terms of their impact testing. So while ECE 2206 will have, different tests for modular helmets, whereas race guys, they're not going to use a modular helmet. Those two helmets are tested for the same absorption rate on the same equipment. So actually an FIM impacts and absorbs enough energy in the same way that a 2206 helmet does. So those two monikers are the greatest that we currently have kind of in our territories,
That's brilliant. So people listening to this will probably be looking at their helmets now, looking at what sort of markings they've got on them. If they've got a 2205 helmet, should they be panicking and going, oh, I need to upgrade to the 2206? Or what sort of how long and quick is that transition going to be?
So I've just seen some information over the past couple of days that there was like a 4-step phasing process to going over to 2206. We're most of the way through that. So most manufacturers are now moving more and more of their helmets over to 2206. As a distributor, as a and as a manufacturer, because it affects those people on the same levels, we are not beholden to. We are still allowed to produce 2205 helmets until January next year, and still allowed to import 2205 helmets till next year. So that's January 2024 when that change. As for a retailer, there will be a grace period, because obviously there's going to be a large number of 2205 helmets in the market. As a consumer, do you necessarily want to go, I've got a 2205 helmet, I must replace it? Well, not necessarily. 2205 and 2206 to a degree, they're a minimum legal standard. And actually, if you're buying a helmet from a good brand, the chances are that it probably exceeds 2205 already, because nobody goes out to make a helmet unsafe, right? Therefore, I would say, if you can afford it and you want to afford it, absolutely transfer over to a 2206 helmet. It's going to improve the safety. If you can't afford to, don't worry about that. If you've got a good quality 2205 helmet, don't worry about that. If you've got a nicely branded 2205 helmet, don't worry about that particularly. You know, it's something that can be done in the future. So that, yeah, that's probably my advice for a consumer that has a 2205. It's okay. Don't worry, you know.
Good. No, because I know mine's a 2205 and you're looking at it, making sure. You've touched a little bit on budget then. Obviously, it's really interesting to know that people can walk into the shop and buy sort of, you know, GP sort of grade helmets. People, obviously, not everyone has that budget. What would you say are the main differences? So if someone goes into a shop and goes, right, I want to get a really safe helmet, you know, really safety conscious, but I've not got budget, spend hundreds and hundreds on a helmet. On helmets that are a little bit more sort of budget friendly, would you still just be looking out for the safety markings, and what would you sort of check to make sure they are within budget?
I would say that you've probably got to look at the helmet construction to a degree. As you move up through the budget range, you get different materials that make the helmet. You get different densities of EPS liner, which is your shock absorbing piece within the helmet. You tend to get more features within a helmet. So things like sun visors, modular, more ventilation, because all these things in some way could potentially detract from the safety if you're not careful as a manufacturer about it. So actually, if we're going to pack loads into the helmet, we need more work to make that helmet safer. So generally, as you go up through the range, you don't necessarily get a huge increase of safety, but you would get an increase with the features that you get within the helmet. Again, if you're on a budget, I would personally say that look for what you can afford in the 2206 range right now. Like if you are stuck to a budget, because that means you know you're going to get the safest helmet test done. Beautiful. You're going to get a really safe helmet. And if it's within your budget, that's absolutely fantastic. So I'd definitely say that's a way to go for it. One thing to bear in mind is that, going back to what I originally said about the materials that we make out of a helmet, effectively, the shell of a helmet dictates how long that a helmet can be used for. Okay, so as we go up through the budget range, we tend to move away from what we call polycarbonate helmets, and we tend to work into fiber reinforced helmets. Fiber reinforced helmets, again, can be made from a multitude of different materials that reinforce that shell, but there's a big jump up from polycarbonate into a fiber reinforced helmet. Because the helmet shell is stronger, the EPS liner can be made softer as a result. So we tend to get longer lifespan out of the helmet. What I tell my businesses that I deal with when training them on helmet safety is I say, really, a consumer needs to be thinking about changing a polycarbonate helmet after 3 years. Whereas a fiber reinforced helmet, you can consider it, the lifespan of it, for 5 years. So actually, if you can make that jump to fiber reinforced helmet, you might perhaps be getting more value in the long term, as well as that potential for the helmet being slightly stronger shell, slightly safer as a result. You know, so there's those kind of factors that we need to consider as well. Different density EPS liners, you're really getting into the weeds. You're going to need to go to a very good dealer that knows a product very well to go into that kind of side of things. But again, the helmets are tested to that impact testing, 2205, 2206. So I would say if you're on a budget, look to what you can afford in the 2206 range. You can't go far wrong at that.
Fantastic. And it's actually really interesting that when you're breaking it down there, of all the different components that make up a helmet actually. And just quickly looking at testing, when you're there, you know, you're having a helmet tested, I'm assuming all these different components are being tested as well. So like the visor, the strap, is that right? Sort of how many of the components are tested?
Under ECE regulation, yeah, like everything is tested. So for example, we stick the helmet on a head shape, we put something on the chin strap and it pulls down very aggressively with a certain force, with a certain weight through it. Chin strap must stay in place. No problems at all. We fire small projectiles at the visor to make sure that it's won't be kind of impacted, or the eyes won't be damaged by any incoming projectiles in the event of an accident. We're not allowed to have a visor that shatters, for example, as well, because that could cause any internal injuries, you know, to your face, to your skin, something like that, if we do have an impact. And under 2206 regulation, for the first time as well, what we see is there's a test for peripheral gear as well. So under 2205, a manufacturer could make a helmet and say, hey, this comm system is designed for this helmet. There's a recess within the shell. Happy days. It goes in there, looks really nice. Good. But under 2206, now that helmet has to be tested with that piece in place. Now, don't get me wrong. As a consumer, you could buy X helmet, put whatever comm system you want on it. But if a manufacturer is saying this has been built for this helmet, then we must test that piece to make sure that it doesn't impede that safety. So that's another thing that's coming through on the 2206, which is, I think, personally has been really beneficial to consumers, knowing that what they're buying specific to that helmet doesn't affect the safety. So that's a really cool thing as well.
Wow. I mean, yeah, I feel like everyone watching this now is going to be a safety expert when they're walking in to get their helmet. So they walked into the shop, they've seen the helmet they want, they know that, yeah, it's absolutely up to par with safety and have all the testing. Right at the beginning, you obviously mentioned fitting. So when they're putting on a helmet, obviously being in the shop, they're going to hopefully have someone there that can help them. But what do they want to be looking out for when they are actually fitting a helmet?
Cool. Yeah. Again, this is a most important thing. And there's a couple of different ways of fitting a helmet. It's always difficult as well, because a lot of people necessarily don't understand, you know, first time people, you know, often buy a helmet that's too big, because sometimes they can be quite aggressive to actually get them on. They're quite tight at the cheek pads. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, talk about how a helmet should fit you on your face effectively. There's two places that a helmet really grips you. Okay, we have the cheeks here, and we have this part of your head here. This is the widest part of your head around here. Now, a lot of new consumers, when they go into a shop, they get to helmet to about here, and they try and put it on there and they go, oh, that's a bit tight. I want one a little bit bigger. But that's actually this fitment here. What's much more important is this fitment here, because if we have an impact, we need the helmet touching us really, really comfortably, so that the head itself, we are not impacting the EPS liner, but actually the EPS liner can compress if we need it to. So this is your most important fitment. These in general can be changed, or at least will compress in for different brands. I also personally recommend that a customer puts on a helmet from the back part of their head. So if I turn my head to the side, if you put your helmet on this way, this is the narrowest part of your head. And as a result of that, that tight cheek pads thing, you can kind of get around, and you can get a helmet to be fitted a little bit more comfortably. First thing you want to do when you actually get your head eventually into the helmet, you want to ask yourself, have you got any areas on the inside of the helmet that are giving you any discomfort? Okay. If you're putting it on straight away, you've got discomfort, like, you know, it's probably not going to serve you. It's, you know, for the life of your motorcycling. It's an immediate thing. And a lot of the time people will go, if it is an incorrectly fitted helmet, they'll go, oh, I've got a bit of a lump here. I've got a bit of a ridge here. I'm not really feeling this one. And that's fine. Okay. So if you've got any areas of kind of positive pressure on your head, or likewise, if you've got any negative pressure on your head, so you've got a bit of a void and you think, I can't really feel the helmet here, I can't feel here, chances are it's not the right helmet for you. Okay. And that's because different head shapes effectively. So every manufacturer has an idea about the shape that an average head is that should fit into their helmet. And you may fit XYZ brand better or worse than other brands. Also, you might within a single brand fit a different model differently. So it's really, really important to actually get these things on your head. Once you've kind of confirmed with the guy that the person in the shop that you're working with, that you've got no positive or negative pressure, then we can have a really good look at how the helmet fits you. Now, like I say, there's two ways that I really like to do this. The first way, really, really simple. We pop the helmet onto the head. I would then
I've got a helmet here. I'm going to give it a go while you're doing it. Make sure that it's fitting.
Absolutely.
Right. Put this on. Take the gloves out. Don't want to lose them. Pop the hair back. Fun one for the girls. Oh. Okay.
Beautiful. How do you feel?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, have you got any areas on the inside of the helmet that are giving you any positive or negative pressure on the inside?
No, I can feel it sort of hugging all of my head. And like you were saying about the cheeks, that it's a bit hamster-like, but it's good. It's not uncomfortable.
Yeah. Absolutely. One thing that I can see with you wearing this helmet that somebody going into a shop wouldn't be able to see themselves is that your eyes are very central in the aperture. So if this is the space that we've got to look through, your eyes aren't here. They're also not here. They're right in the center. That means when you do your lifesaver look, you're going to get the best view from the helmet, checking for traffic. And it just means that the helmet's in the right place. So definitely on first looking at this looks like a really good fitting helmet. What I would then do is I grab the chin bar like this and hold the helmet in place. That's exactly right. And I would ask you to move your head side to side like this and up and down like this. And what you want to make sure is that your head isn't sliding around on the inside of the helmet, that you're being gripped. That means that obviously in the event of an accident, it's going to stay where it needs to. So it's going to be able to absorb the energy as we need it to, which is brilliant. So just upon you actually grabbing that helmet, looks like a really, really good fit for me. What I would say is obviously you've got quite long, glossy hair. Now that is going to play into that factor. So you probably are going to get a little bit more up down movement like this than I am. Probably because I've got so much product in my hair, but also I haven't got that long glossy hair because it effectively creates a slip plane. The most important thing we're looking for when you've got that helmet on, you moving your head around, is no excessive movement within the helmet. One thing that some people like to do is when they push their helmet to the side here, they just like to make sure that they can't get any, fingers down the inside of the cheek pads, which again, that's, you don't want it so tight that it's going to make you uncomfortable, like I say. But if you can also slip your hand down on the inside when you're pushing your cheeks to one side like this, the chances are wearing that helmet for a few months, it's going to break in and it's going to offer you too much space, and you're going to be constantly moving it around when you're riding your bike. And that's really not a very good thing at all. So just upon looking at this, I think this looks like a really good fitting helmet on you.
Happy days. Perfect. Now get ready for the helmet hair. I'd ask you for your tips on that, but we'll save that for another video. That's awesome. I mean, I've already learned so much from everything you've said of sort of, when I'm gonna get my next helmet. You were talking about obviously the different materials and what helmets are built up of can affect their lifespan. We obviously look after our bikes and make sure that we're doing all we can to sort of maintain them. What sort of day-to-day, week-to-week or ride-to-ride things would you suggest on just sort of maintaining sort of the health of your helmet?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, keep it as clean as you can. If you're commuting every day during the winter, I get it. It's going to get dirty, no problems at all. But keep it as clean as you can, because that just means you can see if there's any issues with the shell or anything else like that. Definitely a first port of call. I would say, be careful what you are cleaning it with occasionally. You don't want to use brake cleaner on it because there are materials within the shell. The shells are made from resin if they're fiber reinforced, and you could have chemical interaction there. It would be very rare, but just be careful. My personal recommendation is literally just water and a microfiber cloth. You would be absolutely blown away by what you can do with water and a microfiber cloth. And to give you the best example of that is the TT. So we run the race service at the TT. The guys are doing huge amounts of miles at very high speed. And when the helmets come back to the race service, they are disgusting. You should see the amount of flies on the front of them. And we still just use spritz of water and a bit of elbow grease, and it works really, really well. Likewise, you can do wonders for yourself, your investment, if you simply spray a bit of antibac on it pretty regularly on the inside. One of the biggest things that breaks down the sponge element, so therefore the fitting part of the helmet on the inside, is bacteria that are in the oil and the skin on the inside of the helmet. So if you can keep those at bay, you'll keep the sponges in better condition, so it will fit you better as you want it to for the lifespan of the helmet. And then the last thing I'm going to tell you, I'm actually going to tell you off, Ellen, is don't put your gloves in the helmet. And the reason,
Right, okay.
and the reason for that is there's a couple of different things. So first of all, Velcro. I don't know if your gloves have Velcro on. A lot of gloves do. Velcro can pull the materials. It just maybe doesn't make the inside of the helmet necessarily a nice place to be. But the other thing is, as we ride, our gloves are out front. If you get a little bit of water on the road, you're flicking dirt from the road up. If you've got fumes, if you're sat in traffic, all those fumes could be coming out to your gloves. Those petrochemicals can be very damaging to the EPS liner. Often EPS liners are simply made from polystyrene, and petrochemicals can seriously degrade EPS or polystyrene very quickly. So something I recommend is don't put your gloves in your helmet. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
Every rider does it.
Even more. Purely because I lose them all the time. But no, I will definitely remember that. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought, because I know, I mean, I wear makeup, so I'm constantly cleaning my helmet after every ride. And because I know, you need to keep it clean inside, and I've got a sort of a anti-bac sort of fresh up like spray for my helmet. But I didn't think actually, your gloves are getting so dirty on a ride, and I just chuck them in there without thinking. So I've gone to all that effort of cleaning the inside and then just throw them in. So it's a good point. I think a lot of people will be going, oh right, okay.
I do the same thing, Ellen. Don't worry. It's all.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do. I'm going to be spreading the word now. No, this has been really interesting. I think just you can see how much knowledge you've got from obviously all the experience of working with helmets, all these different brands. As a bit of a I don't know, maybe an insider look on things, obviously clothing is developing, and motorcycle clothing is developing at such a sort of a rapid pace, which is fantastic, and there's new materials coming out, and we're seeing a lot of I see a lot of the shows, you've got these jackets with sort of like airbags in them and things like that. Is there anything that's going to be coming out in the future for helmets that's going to really change the game at all that you've got wind of?
I'm seeing a lot of technology, to be honest with you, from helmets that that open out from different areas, to helmets with cameras in, to all sorts of different things. The biggest kind of forward momentum that we have in terms of helmets in the industry at the minute is really boringly, again, is to do with safety. So one of the things that over the past few years that has been really highlighted to manufacturers of helmets is rotational force injuries. Under 2206 and under the FIM regulation, we now see a specific test which tries to highlight the importance of rotational force injuries. Now, rotational force injuries are very damaging to the brain because effectively, in terms of a linear impact, if we hit our head on something, there is a structure within our skull that's actually very good at protecting the brain. But if we have a knock to the head which turns our head very quickly, our brain effectively sloshes around on the inside of the skull and could become very, very damaged. But we don't see that on the outside. If I have an impact, I have a bruise or a skull fracture. If I slosh this around, it doesn't look like anything's bad on the outside. The latest helmet technology that I'm seeing that's really gaining a lot of traction is the protection from rotational force injuries. I work with a helmet brand called Bell, and they are at the forefront of using technology to protect us from this type of injury. So they have now 3 systems on the market with further and further development through each of them to create a slip plane on the inside of the helmet, which actually prevents that rotational force, which is really, really fantastic. Different manufacturers do it in different ways for those helmets that are 06 approved or FIM approved, but that's definitely going to be at the forefront of pushing helmet safety forward, is the protection from rotational force elements. Outside of that, it's fill your boots. I mean, I can really see the advantage of, cameras in helmets, so we don't have to have a screen, because if we don't have to have a visor, we got more shell, we've got more protection. Maybe we could get one that sees behind us, so we wouldn't even have to move our eyes around to see behind us. I mean, the world's the limit, and we live in a really technological age. So I think it's really exciting things to come, to be fair.
That's awesome. And before we finish, so when I was talking to a friend of mine that rides, that we were doing this, there's that age-old sort of horror story of if you drop your helmet once, accidentally drop it, it's some people I've heard have gone, oh no, you can't use that helmet again. How much truth is there behind that? Sort of how hard would you have to drop your helmet to sort of impact it?
This is a really difficult question to answer. I always use the phrase simply, if there's any doubt, there's no doubt. Replace the helmet. It's not worth it, because your brain is such a sensitive piece of your body and can become damaged very easily. Having said that, what you can do is you can go and talk to your shop. You can go and talk, and they will probably talk to the manufacturer, the distributor in our case, and talk you through what has happened. A lot of the time, there's two different elements to the helmet that are really can be damaged, which is the shell and the EPS liner. Okay, if we've got a really hard shell like this, so this is the Arai shell that you see here. If we've got a really hard shell, what will happen is we'll impact this, but there'll be no deformation here on the outside. So we can see that the EPS liner on the inside hasn't changed shape at all. We know that that's happened. What I do then as a professional is I come and look at the helmet and say, right, can we see any damage in the shell? All right, or has the paint just come off? Has it impacted one of the plastic parts on the outside of the helmet and nothing more? Because then it'll be okay, you know. On carbon fiber helmets, a lot of the time, because we can see the weave of the fiber, you can see when those fibers have delaminated away from the resin. So then you can actually see if there's been any physical damage to the shell. With polycarbonate helmets, it's a little bit more difficult because they have more flexibility in their characteristics. So I would say if you are running a polycarbonate helmet and you do have a drop from arm height, you probably need to consider replacing your helmet, because what happens is that that shell deforms more easily and it impacts the EPS liner from the inside, if you can see that as I'm making that kind of shape with my hands. So it's something that I would always bear in mind. It would be, if I did drop my helmet, and it's easy for me to say as a professional, but if I did drop my helmet, I would absolutely, at the very least, go and talk to somebody who is an expert, and they will find out for you if they can't tell you themselves. And again, this is part of my job role to educate the dealer network so that a consumer can make an informed decision. And if they need to replace the helmet, they can do it. And if they don't, great, it saves you the money, you know?
Perfect. So pop into your local store and speak to them, and hopefully they'll be able to advise.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's yeah.
I think as an extension to that, Joe,
yeah,
I just wanted to ask, is it okay to buy a secondhand helmet?
Again, as a professional, not something that I recommend at all. You know, in reality, we don't know what has happened to that helmet. You could say any number of things about what you have and haven't done to the helmet, but it's not something that I would recommend at all, to be fair. And I know it's a really, sometimes, you know, you buy a helmet, it doesn't fit you. I'll stick it on, you know, on a marketplace site or something, and it's so easy to do that, but I can't recommend it personally. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I've definitely learned loads. So thank you so much for that, Joe. I really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. Hopefully it wasn't too in depth.
Well, honestly, I just feel like you're like fountain of knowledge. It's brilliant.
Try my best.
All right. Well, that wraps things up for this video. Thanks, Joe, for joining us. And like Ellen said, thanks for sharing your wisdom. And thanks, everyone, for watching today. If you have any questions or comments, please add them down below in the comments section. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out all the other videos in this series. Take care.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.